Hey everybody, what's up? Chad Wesley Smith here for Juggernaut Training Systems. Today we're going to be talking to you about the principle of overload. This is the number 2 priority in our Scientific Principles of Strength Training book, co-authored by myself, Drs. Mike Israetel and Dr. James Hoffman. So, principle of overload, what it really means is that we're training hard enough to warrant adaptations, and that training must continually get harder over time. The most ideal thing that we can do is train as close as possible to our maximum recoverable volume. Just refer to that as MRV. The closer we can get to each individual's MRV, more we're going to optimize their gains. A lot of people will talk about training with the minimum effective dose, right? And minimum effective dose is fine if you want the minimum amount of results, right? But I'm sure everyone watching this wants to get as strong as they can, as quickly as possible. And to do that, you want to push the limit of the MRV and train right up to that limit. And even at times are going to intentionally exceed your MRV. That's going to be a concept of functional overreaching. To maximize our performance, we're going to train as close to our MRV as possible, and it's really going to be hard training. So you may have heard phrases like, train smarter, not harder. Well, the reality of it is that the smartest training you can do is also incredibly hard training, because to push that limit of your MRV, it's going to be very, very challenging for you to do, and probably harder training than you may have ever done before. So as we look at the 3 different phases of training that we're going to do, hypertrophy, strength, and peaking, there are different goals and different overload parameters for each of those. So first, hypertrophy is driven by increased volume. That's the thing that we need to overload for hypertrophy, is increasing the volume from week to week. So when we look here, training must be hard enough to warrant adaptation and must get harder over time. Hypertrophy training is going to get harder over time by doing more training. So whether it's more weight or more sets or more reps at the same weight, or a combination of those two, that's how we need to increase the difficulty there and give ourselves overload stimulus to continually adapt and improve. Hypertrophy is driven by increased volume. We're going to need to train at 60 to 75% of your max in the specific exercise variation for sets of 6 to 12 reps. And we're going to do 15 to 30 sets per week of directed work at each lift. And the 15 to 30 sets, obviously that's a pretty wide range. People are going to have widely varying MRV based on largely genetics, lifestyle factors, nutrition and sleep, supplement use, how advanced they are in their career, size, strength, gender, fiber type, how close are they to being as good as they will ever be, and then just simply amount of weight on the bar. For myself, during a hypertrophy training cycle in the squat, I'm mostly using 485 to maybe up to about 575. So I'm probably not going to need to do as many sets as someone who is using 200 to 225 during their hypertrophy to reach our MRV. They might need to do twice as many sets as me, but they're going to need to do relatively more sets to reach theirs than a more advanced lifter would need to do to reach theirs. All right. So the 60 to 75% for sets of 6 to 12 reps. So I'm referring there to the specific exercise, because you might be using different exercise variations in different parts of the training cycle. But if you're doing high bar squats and you're a low bar squatter with wraps, and you're doing high bar squat in sleeves for training, make sure you're taking 60 to 75% off of that number, not off of your low bar competition with wraps number. All right, otherwise you might reach that MRV a little bit too quickly. In the 15 to 30 sets per week, I say directed at each lift. It's not just 15 to 30 sets of squats or of just high bar squat or whatever variation you're using. It's all of the primary work you're doing directed to improve that lift that's disruptive enough to really elicit a significant training response. So for the squat, that may be squat and squatting variations, a leg press, lunges, step ups, split squats, any kind of exercises like that. As you get into smaller machine-based exercises, obviously leg press is a machine, but something like leg extensions or hamstring curls, those are probably not going to be disruptive enough to include within the 15 to 30. That would just be sort of fluff work outside of the MRV. For the bench press, that's going to be any kind of bench variations, military press, compound assistance movements, which could be machine movements like chest press, flies. I would not include direct back work like rows, lat pull downs, pull-ups, chin-ups into your bench MRV, because while the lats serve a very important role of stability, shoulder health, mechanical advantage in the bench press, they're not the prime movers of the bar and shouldn't be accounted with the training of the prime movers, the chest, triceps, and shoulders. And then for the deadlift, that's going to be any kind of deadlifting variation, whether it's from the floor, from blocks, deficit, box deadlifts, RDLs, good mornings. If you have access to it, I think a great option, especially during hypertrophy, is the back attack machine. Heavy weighted GHRs, back extensions, reverse hypers, all of those would be included in that 15 to 30 sets per week. All right, so as we're looking to increase general strength, the stimulus that's going to drive that adaptation is increased intensity, all right? So as we're looking at this, training hard enough to warrant adaptation and must get harder over time. Hypertrophy, we're trying to increase the volume, not necessarily from session to session, but from week to week, microcycle to microcycle, and certainly macrocycle to macrocycle. So this training cycle needed to be more volume than the previous training cycle, and the next one will need to be more than this one. For strength, we're looking to do that with intensity, all right? More weight on the bar. You need to go heavier in this training cycle than you did in last training cycle to get stronger, all right? Very, very simple concept, but very important to make sure that you're doing it and not kind of get lost in the minutia of the training. And for maximal results with this, intermediate and advanced lifters are going to want to keep their intensity between 70 and 85%, and female lifters and beginner lifters are going to be able to do that with 75 to 90%. Females particularly tend to tolerate relative intensities. Maybe they can do 90% for 5, while a more advanced male lifter is maybe only going to be able to do 85% for 5 or 90% for 3. So they're going to be able to train at the higher end of those ranges. And they're going to do that for sets of 3 to 6 reps and 10 to 20 overloading sets per week directed at each lift. Finally, as we move on to peaking, all right, the goals of peaking are developing technical prowess and neural adaptations. All right, and the neural part of things is very, very important. That's when you're going to have the really high force lifts. So when you're over here in hypertrophy and you're working with 70, 75%, there's not nearly the same neural stress component of the training, but because of that, it's not developing those more fine characteristics that you need to hit 100% effort lifts. All right, those can only really be developed by doing 90% plus very neurally taxing movements. So during peaking, we're looking to develop technical prowess and neural adaptations, and the overload parameters there basically just going to be the range above general strength. So 85% plus for intermediate and advanced lifters, 90% plus for females and beginner lifters. All right, and that's all going to be sets of 1 to 3 reps and 5 to 10 overloading sets per week. Again, keep in mind that the more advanced the lifter is, the heavier the weight on a bar, the lower number of sets they're going to need to reach their MRV. For myself, during a peaking block in the squat, I'm really only dealing with poundages of 850, 875, 900, 925, and those are so neurologically taxing that I'm not going to be able to do 10 sets in a week of over 850 pounds. So I'm going to be on the very, very low end of that with really at most 5 sets per week. So take that into account. It's the size of the lifter, the strength, proximity to career peak, gender and fiber type all need to be taken into account when assessing MRV and working within these different ranges. So the last thing we want to talk about today are under and over application of the overload principle. So an under application of the overload principle is really going to be as simple as not training hard enough. All right, you're not doing enough volume to drive hypertrophic gains. You're not doing enough intensity to drive general strength gains, and you're not working those 90% plus ranges to develop the neural and technical qualities that you need for properly peaking for a meet. All right, so the under application of it's pretty simple. You just don't train hard enough. All right, over application of overload is in some ways a great problem to have because it means that you work hard. All right, we just need to make sure that that hard work is being properly focused. It's the two ends of the spectrum where people kind of go wrong with that. They either do too much volume or they do too much intensity. All right, and both of those ideas are really important and key to getting stronger, but what's the most important is that you apply them at the proper times. Basically, if you're doing too much volume all the time, you're never going to be able to decay fatigue enough to handle those 90% plus weights and develop the technical prowess and neurological qualities needed for a max lift. Where if you're training too heavy all the time, you're never going to be able to do enough volume to develop the hypertrophy that you need, maximize the amount of muscle you have on your frame, and then be able to take that increased muscle mass and teach it how to produce more force. This is the principle of overload. It's all about training hard enough to drive those adaptations, and that training must get more difficult over time. Thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe to the channel.